Children's health is uniquely and disproportionately affected by pesticide residues, and this reality deserves far more urgency than it typically receives in public discussions about food safety. While regulatory standards are often designed around adult physiology, children are not simply small adults. Their bodies, brains, and metabolic systems are still developing, and this developmental vulnerability makes even low-level, chronic pesticide exposure potentially more damaging, more permanent, and more difficult to reverse. One of the most serious concerns is that children eat, drink, and breathe more per unit of body weight than adults. This means that a child consuming the same fruit or vegetable as an adult receives a higher relative dose of any pesticide residue present. At the same time, children's detoxification systems, including the liver and kidneys, are immature and less efficient at breaking down and excreting toxic substances. As a result, chemicals can circulate longer in their bodies and interact more intensely with developing tissues, increasing the likelihood of harm even when exposure levels are considered safe by adult-based standards. Neurodevelopment is a central area of risk. The developing brain undergoes rapid growth and reorganization from the prenatal period through early childhood and into adolescence. During these windows, even subtle chemical interference can alter how neurons migrate, connect, and communicate. A growing body of research links early life pesticide exposure to reduced cognitive performance, attention deficits, behavioral problems, and increased risk of neurodevelopmental disorders. Some pesticides are specifically designed to disrupt nervous system signaling in insects, and although human biology is different, children's developing nervous systems are far less resilient to such interference than adult brains. Endocrine disruption adds another layer of concern. Many pesticides can interfere with hormones that regulate growth, metabolism, immune function, and sexual development. In children, hormonal signals act as precise biological instructions, guiding the timing of puberty, brain maturation, and physical development. Disrupting these signals, even slightly, can shift developmental trajectories in ways that may not become apparent until years later. Altered puberty timing, metabolic dysfunction, and increased susceptibility to chronic disease later in life have all been associated with early exposure to endocrine-disrupting chemicals, including certain pesticides. Prenatal exposure is particularly alarming because the fetus has virtually no capacity to detoxify harmful substances. Pesticides consumed by a pregnant parent can cross the placenta, directly exposing the developing fetus during the most sensitive stages of organ and brain formation. Evidence links prenatal pesticide exposure to low birth weight, preterm birth, and long-term cognitive and behavioral impacts. These early insults can set the stage for lifelong health challenges, reinforcing the idea that pesticide exposure is not just a short-term food safety issue, but a generational one. Another often overlooked risk is cumulative and combined exposure. Children are rarely exposed to a single pesticide in isolation. Instead, they encounter complex mixtures through food, water, household environments, and even school grounds. Regulatory safety limits generally evaluate chemicals one at a time, failing to account for additive or synergistic effects. This gap is especially troubling for children, whose developing systems may respond unpredictably to chemical combinations that appear benign when assessed individually. Socioeconomic disparities further amplify these risks. Families with limited access to organic or lower residue foods, safe housing, and clean environments often face higher overall pesticide exposure. Children in agricultural communities may be exposed not only through diet, but also through environmental drift from nearby fields or residues brought home on caregivers' clothing. These children bear a disproportionate burden of risk without corresponding protections, highlighting a systemic failure rather than an individual one. For families, the practical implications are sobering but not entirely without options. While it is impossible to eliminate all exposure, steps such as prioritizing organic versions of high-residue foods for children, washing and preparing produce carefully, and increasing dietary variety can help reduce cumulative intake. However, it is important to acknowledge that these strategies place responsibility on families rather than addressing the root causes of exposure, which lie in agricultural policy, regulatory gaps, and market-driven production systems. The most troubling conclusion is that current pesticide regulations may not adequately protect children's long-term health. Safety thresholds are often based on outdated models that underestimate developmental vulnerability and fail to reflect real-world exposure patterns. When evidence consistently points to risks affecting brain development, hormonal regulation, and lifelong disease susceptibility, continued reliance on minimal compliance standards becomes ethically questionable. Children have no control over the foods they eat or the environments they inhabit, yet they may carry the biological consequences of pesticide exposure for decades. This imbalance between vulnerability and protection is the core warning. Addressing pesticide residues in children's diets is not merely a matter of consumer choice, but a public health responsibility that demands stronger precaution, better regulation, and a willingness to prioritize long-term human development over short-term agricultural convenience.